I'm a YouTuber with Aphantasia. What's Aphantasia? Briefly speaking, I have no mind's eye. If you tell a lot of people to close their eyes and imagine a red apple, they'll see this. Some folks will have a partially formed image like this. But me, I see this. And yet, I make videos. Before I got on YouTube about a year ago, I was online for work for quite a while, but it was mostly as an author. And even back then, people found it confusing enough that I was an author with Aphantasia. They couldn't believe it reading my novels because they visualized what I was writing about. One reader actually asked me, how do you write without an imagination? Okay, so not trying to shame you if you're wondering the same thing, but that's actually a misconception. I totally have an imagination. It just isn't visual. And I'm not alone. There are many creative people out there, some of them quite successful, who also have aphantasia. Here's a couple of famous examples, probably the two most famous ones. The first is Ed Catmull. He's the former president of Pixar and Walt Disney Studios. He has aphantasia. And the story goes that he first noticed it when he was trying to meditate with a colleague and visualize a sphere. And here's a quote from him, something he told the BBC. I went home, closed my eyes, I couldn't see a thing, and for an entire week, I kept trying to visualize the sphere. In addition to the former head of Pixar, Aldous Huxley, the famous author of Brave New World, also had aphantasia. And it's really funny, if you go and you read, to me, I can tell there are lots of different tells, the way that he talks about language, the way that he describes, the way that he leans on dialogue in certain areas. I do that as well. All to me scream aphantasia. So I wanted to talk a little today about the ways that aphantasia changed the way that I film and edit. And so if you're not a particularly visual person and you're struggling with these things, maybe you can use these strategies, or if you are a viewer of the channel, you'll probably notice in real time from now on that I'm doing these things. Okay, so the first way that aphantasia kind of butts up against my editing and video making is that I have to do detailed planning and scripting. I have to be very, very intentional. I don't have like a gut feel like, oh, this would be good here, this would be good there. So I can't really imagine things before they happen. You'll see me a lot on my phone. I got my script here for the aphantasia video. One day when I'm back in Sticks and Bricks and I have a non-mobile studio, when I'm not on the road, I'm hoping to have a teleprompter and put it in front of me. I love teleprompters, it would be really cool. But for now, I just kind of look down at my outline every now and then. I talk to y'all and then look down at my outline and work at it that way. But I have very specific things I want to say. I have a very specific kind of story block outlines that I do that I can put B-roll or ideas that I have, and I plan that explicitly as I go along. I don't fly by the seat of my pants, oh, you know, it'd be nice, because I don't have a way of testing that mentally. The next way that it really comes to play when I'm making videos is that I'm very data-driven and I'm very analytical. I can't really rely on an intuitive sense of what a scene should look like. When I first started out, actually, before I had my style, I would watch a lot of YouTube and I would sit there and I would count. I'd be like, okay, well, they're doing like 4 seconds of this kind of shot, and they were going into 10 seconds of this kind of shot, and then 2 seconds. And I would write down sequences that I liked. I would sit there and count and clock what people were doing and the kind of pace and rhythm. And then I would take some of these ratios that I saw people using that had the feel I wanted, and I would try clocking my own work. And sometimes I would find that, you know, between my speaking speed or the difference between our channel topics, it wouldn't work. I would actually sit there and work it out. But I have basically certain intervals of time and certain transitions and things that are very, very standardized that I use. I have levels that I set for things that I stick to, that I found that work. Basically little patterns. You know, if you do like knitting or something, you probably have patterns of purl 1, knit 2, or I don't do that, but I know that they have those different patterns. It's very similar. So I would come up with different patterns by analyzing other people's work, trying it, changing it, and then saving it for myself, because I don't really do it by feel. I just can't. The next way is that I have to use tools to externally visualize. So I will have folders that are my file folders for my projects, for when I put things into my editing software, where I will have the images queued up, different B-roll I want to use, and I'll have it there at a glance so I can kind of look at it and think about it. Rather than working on the fly, I have it all laid out for myself so that I can slot it on, because I don't really have a mental hard drive to put it there. So the way that I organize myself, even with files and structures, tends to be very discreet and very explicit as I work. And I'm very organized in a way I don't think I would have to be quite this organized and this regimented if I had some kind of visual imagination. The next thing is that I focus a lot on audio and script. People have pointed out that I'm very good at on cameras, that I have a good personality, that good talker, which honestly was a big relief to me because I am not necessarily confident about it, but taking that at face value, that would be very on brand for somebody with aphantasia to focus a lot on what I'm saying, the lessons, the dialogue, as opposed to the visuals, because I can't rely on the visuals. I'm not gifted at fine tuning it. I try to nail down what I can with the visual atmosphere, but it's a very 80-20 process for me. I come also from an author's background, and I've done a lot of nonfiction work. I've done a lot of articles, a lot of paid work for various magazines online. So a lot of times I'll have intro, I'll have the contentions, they call them, the main points you're making, and then the outro. And I always have that established on my outline. It's very rare that I deviate from an outline, unless I think of something that I wanted to cover, and then, I can move that around in the narrative, but I don't really go into videos without talking points, at least without those contentions and an idea of what I'm saying, because I am counting on that to carry a lot of the video's value and entertainment. The next way that it manifests itself is through a more iterative editing process. So I've talked a little bit about this in other videos, and I can go further into my video editing process if you'd like in a later video, but briefly, I tend to do things in two passes. So I will do what I call the rough cut, where I take the video and the audio tracks and I bring them in and I sync them up and I color correct everything, and then I go through and I get my A-roll set. So A-roll is the main body of the video. For a lot of my videos, this is the part where I'm talking to you. That is distinct from B-roll, which are supplemental images that I put on screen. I'll either do demonstratives to show you something, or for me, I do a lot of jokes. It's a lot of humor B-roll. But on the rough cut, I just do the A-roll. So I cut out all the ridiculous parts, I get everything in the right order, I get what I want to say to y'all set in the first pass. A-cuts are pretty straightforward. They take a long time because you're fine-tuning and figuring it out. You have to a lot of times go over things a bunch of times, but I have to do it in one pass for me. It's straightforward, I get it all set, so that when I go through, I do what I call the final cut, and that's when a lot of the magic happens. That's the B-roll, the demonstratives, the jokes, the graphic overlays, the motion graphics, the audio, lots of the fancy stuff that makes the video pop. I do that on the final cut, I do that on the second pass. And as I'm doing that, I have to replay a lot. Everything I put in, every little bit of B-roll or effect I do, I don't have a sense of the timing, like what it's gonna look like and what it's gonna feel like, other than those ratios I talked about a little bit earlier. I have an 80-20 on it now, but to actually see what it looks like, I gotta play it and replay it and tweak it because I can't really imagine it. And a lot of times I'm moving a clip quite a bit back and forth, trying to get it so that it lands just where I want it to. And that means I might watch one joke 15 or 20 times, trying to get it to the right frame so that it lands as actually funny. And that iterative editing process, that's the kind of thing that I would love to have a visual imagination because it would save me a lot of time, but unfortunately I don't. And the final way is that I find that I have to collaborate unexpectedly. And for me, the way this always manifests is my thumbnails. So this is actually my second channel. My first channel is Our Moving Castle. It is an RV travel channel I run with my husband, Justin, who is a co-host. Justin does a lot of the thumbnails for Our Moving Castle. These days we collaborate. I basically have learned to sort of emulate his style, and I mostly commission harder thumbnails for him. He's better in Photoshop than I am. Over here on the Page Turner channel, I do all my own thumbnails, and I've tried all sorts of different things. I usually have like a concept for a thumbnail. So it'll be like, okay, well, I want it to have these elements, this color, this word, this expression, and I'll have a vague sense of the placement, but when it comes to how big like text should be, like what it's abutting against, is this stuff aligned, the fine-tuning adjustments, these things are very easy for other people. They're like impossible for me. And a lot of times I have to get the elements on the thumbnail and play around for a while. Like I said, I have to iteratively do this. And then when it's done, a lot of times I'll have 2 to 5 versions of the thumbnail with different colored letters, different size letters, with just different things, and I cannot tell what looks better. It's like even comparing them can get difficult because I can't carry it in my head. I'm just not visual, not in the way that most people are visual. So at that point, I will show it to one of my good friends. I'll be like, which one is better? And it's really funny because they always say the same one, like always, like it's obvious to them, it's really quick. But I can't tell. And so that's a big way that I think that my aphantasia rears its ugly head, is that I have to get that feedback. It's not obvious to me. Visual things are not obvious to me. I miss the obvious. So that's rough, right? Well, I talked to a couple of good friends of mine that do not have aphantasia. They are completely the opposite of me. They're very visually gifted. And I was like, you know, really stinks, right? Like I have basically this disability and I'm trying to do this. And they were like, no, Paige, no. It's not better or worse. You're just different. There are a couple of things that are really advantageous about having aphantasia and doing video. So they told me about that. One thing that they've both noticed about me, because they've gone grocery shopping with me, is that when I walk into a grocery store with somebody, if my friend is really good at visual imagination, they are imagining where things should be a lot. Like Justin, my husband, is especially this way. If things have a strange layout in the store, he has the hardest time finding things, which, as we've been traveling in an RV, can be very difficult. Conversely, I don't imagine things. I can actually see what's in the store in a way that he can't, because I don't have any preconceived notion of what a grocery store is in my head. It sounds really strange, but bear with me here a little bit. So I'll walk in and I will see all the new flavors and all the new things that he won't. I'm like this eagle-eye new thing spotter. If something's in the wrong spot, I can always find it because my brain isn't filling in how things should be. And Justin has linked it, I think correctly, to a psychological concept called functional fixedness. So with functional fixedness, it's a bias that we get as human beings a lot. And we get this idea that something goes somewhere, it's used for this. So you have a pair of scissors, you're like, scissors are used to cut. And you might be in a situation where all you got is a pair of scissors and you're like, I don't know what to do. But scissors are just like two knives together, and you might be in a survival situation and, you know, obviously you break the thing apart, you got two knives. You have knives now. But if you get into the functional fixedness where you're stuck and seeing that as a pair of scissors, you might not realize you have a pair of knives. So Justin says that because I don't have those gut feels, because everything is explicit, that I can be very creative and come up with different ways to do things that other people might not. And I can be very explicit. And he thinks that's a gift. You know, obviously when we're grocery shopping, it's really helpful. We grocery shop well together because of that. But he says I'm able to make more deliberate choices because I don't have that visual chatter. And he says, especially with the YouTube, I know exactly what I'm doing, which is really helpful as I'm going along. I don't really have to rely on the inspiration and gut feel. I have established templates and ways of organizing. And honestly, it was really hard. Oh my gosh, it was so hard to learn. It was so stressful. But now that I've learned, I don't have to sit around waiting for inspiration to strike. I can at least have a place to start. Now, even so, I do get inspired and things do happen. I do have bursts of creativity, but it's nice to not have to wait for the gut feel, to have a basis. And it also, he says, makes me very good at teaching other people because I know how to teach people who aren't naturally gifted. I'm not like, well, you can see what it is from what it looks like. I'm not like that. I'm like, well, if you look at X, Y, and Z and you compare it to A and B, then C. And he says it makes me a very good teacher as well. And it isn't like I don't imagine. Like I was saying, I don't have a mind's eye, but I use my emotions to imagine a lot. I can feel things. And a lot of times I actually feel it on the back of my neck, like the ASMR stuff, kind of like a neck tingle as I'm dreaming and thinking about how people feel. All my imagination is in my neck, is what Justin is always saying. And I think in a way that makes it sort of easier to connect with people because it also, I think, heightens my empathy. Justin is of the firm opinion that all my imagination is in different places than other people's, which instead of being some kind of problem, actually just, yeah, it's part of what makes me unique and gives me different talents. In addition, we were just talking about the auditory and all that. I have a really good auditory imagination. I was a working musician for many years. I also used to work as a small town newspaper reporter back in the day, back in rural Maine. And I was very good at taking detailed notes in board meetings. I also had like a little tape recorder and everything, but I found that a lot of times my actual written out notes were excellent. I also worked as a medical transcriptionist for a hospital system back in Eastern Maine. Again, the auditory memory is good. It actually, in my real life, that helps a lot because when I'm talking to people in conversation, I can usually track what they just said, which makes me a better listener. And when I did a lot of work at the psychological consulting firm and in mental health, you bet your boots remembering what somebody just said is important. But yeah, I'm a YouTuber with aphantasia. And I bet I'm not the only one. Anyway, it was great talking to you as always. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next video.